Okay, everybody, we're going to talk about more table tools. And in this particular video, we're looking at Notebook 6. So go ahead and get that open and ready to follow along. And this notebook is primarily about the two methods, group and pivot, and we use them specifically for category variables. Okay, sorry about the crooked lines there. Okay, so we're going to go through that. So pause the video if you need to, but get Notebook 6 open from the course calendar, and I'll be right back. Now, the notebook starts off talking about lists, and we are shown how to build up a table from scratch using dot with rows, which is real similar to what we've already seen before on the dot with columns. I will say that it's used a lot less often. And most often, almost always, when we import tables from files, we're going to use table.read table. Of all of these, this is by far the most important and one you should learn how to use properly, and I'll point that out as we go through the video. Let's take a look at Notebook 6, sorry. And so the first thing they talk about here, they give us a simple list, okay? And notice this format that I just start with square brackets and then close with square brackets, and then I can use lists. All right. And so then we have this crowded list, which combines the my array and the simple list and some other things. Actually, simple list isn't in here. They just keep adding things. And okay. We aren't going to be doing anything like that the rest of the semester. It's just showing what things are possible. And here is where they show us that the rows of tables are lists. Okay, so we can do the standard table with columns, make array. Okay, and that gives us the title of the column is numbers, and the data in the column are the numbers 1, 2, 3. Now here we have a list, right? Notice that it's given with the square bracket list notation. All right, and then that just gives us the titles of the columns. Now we need to include 3 columns, but we don't. Notice that we are given rows, okay? And so these are going to be, right, the entries across the rows. So milk tea at Asha costs $5.50. We have 4 rows like that, and we get the drinks table. Okay, and we can add another row to the drinks table using with rows. Now, you're going to ask me, how important is this? And I'm going to say it's not that important. It's a useful tool, but we use it very rarely in the rest of the course, okay? So that's why we want to get here and focus on this grouping by one column. And I want to make the point now that we're talking about using categorical data, okay? Category data. And we're going to use the dot group method. And there's this really important point that the dot group method makes it really easy to add in a statistic that we want to collect. What's a statistic? A statistic is any numeric value that we can calculate from a list of numbers, like average, or max, or min, or median, or sum. Okay? And the group method makes it really easy to add all of these in. We often use NP average, but we can use any other function that we'd like. Okay. So let's jump in here. So notice that we're using table.read table to get the survey data. So we have a table that's called survey, and it comes from Welcome Survey version 4 here. All right, and the show 5 lets you know that we have year, which is first, second, third, fourth or above. So that's your year in college, right? So first year is freshman year, second year is sophomore year. We have an extroversion measure, which is a self-reported number between 0 and 10, 10 being more extroverted, 0 being completely introverted. Number of textees, I believe this is per week. Hours of sleep, I guess that's an average per night or how much you got last night. Then handedness, and sleep position, whether you're on your back, on your stomach, on your left, or on your right. Okay, so we have this table. And what will a group by sleep position do? Okay, we'll look at sleep position. It's a category variable. So what it's going to do, and these are called levels. The different answers to a category variable are called levels. So we have one level on your back, we have another level on your left side, another level on your right side, and a fourth level on your stomach. Sorry, I selected more than I meant to on your stomach. So when I do this, I'm going to see 4 levels of the variable, right? Back, left, right, and stomach. So those are the 4 levels, and it shows me a count for each one. All right, so then what are we doing here? This is something we do a lot. We're going to sort with descending equals true, and we're going to include a bar H, right? So this is going to give me a bar graph, but in descending order of popularity. All right, so let's just notice that the right side sleepers, that was the most, okay? And then on your left side, and then on your back and on your stomach was the smallest bar, and it's therefore at the bottom. So this is important. I'm just showing you this part of the code, right? The dot sort. And it's important that we do a descending equals true so that we have the tallest bars, the taller bars at the top of the graph and the smaller bars in the bar graph down towards the bottom. Okay? And then this is survey.group sleep position NP mean. So notice, and I used NP average in my example, but NP mean, I'm allowed to collect a statistic. In this case, instead of finding me the count, right? So up here, it tells me how many people in the survey said they slept on your back. 302 slept on their back, 374 slept on their left side. What is the dot group NP mean? It's going to be the average of some other variable by sleep position. But the question is, what variables? Well, if we go back and look, right, it's actually going to calculate the average for all the other variables. Let's do it. Oh, and you can see now it was not able to calculate a mean for year, because remember that was first year, second year, third year. So that since that's text, it couldn't come up with a mean. It could come up with a mean for extroversion, with a mean for number of textees, and a mean for sleep hours. Why? Well, those are numeric. But again, handedness, it couldn't get a mean for, and year, it couldn't get a mean for. But it did everything it could. All right, and this is one of the big features of the dot group. I'm allowed to put comma and then a function, and it will calculate that for all of the numeric data in the table. Okay, and I used NP average, and it turns out it shows us the same thing. And now look again what they're doing. They're doing the dot group and then the bar H with sleep position, okay? So we get a sleep position, and what's the average? The average is hours of sleep. Okay, and notice that there's not that big a difference. What are they doing here? They're grouping based on year, and they're sorting based on hours of sleep average to see if freshmen, sophomores, juniors, or seniors get the most sleep. And it appears that the lowest, by the way, all the numbers are fairly close to each other, but the lowest is the juniors, the third year students, right? Second lowest is the sophomores, the second year students. And the people getting the most sleep were fourth year or seniors or above, which is interesting. Again, there's not a huge difference between any of the 4 averages for these groups. Okay, what are we doing here? In the next code block, we have survey select year and hours of sleep. It wants to group by year. Okay, and it's going to show that. And then it's going to select the same things, and it's going to show a bar graph based on the year. Okay, so here's the top one, the first row of code. The first line creates this grouping table. The table created by the data display created by the grouping table, and then we have the bar graph that's created in the second line. Again, not a big hours of sleep mean difference between the years, okay? So now we're going to look at using the dot group with two category variables, and it's almost the same, except notice, since I'm going to have two variables, I'm going to enter them as a list. It's not that big a deal that you remember that it's a list, but it is important to get the square brackets on the front and the back. Okay, so square brackets, then I enter my first category variable and then my second category variable in quotation marks, separated by a comma. The square brackets are the important thing there. And I will also point out that the collection of a statistic is still really easy. I still just use the comma followed by the function name. Okay, so life is good here. Sorry. And I'll get rid of the mark there and head to the code again. So here, this is what I was showing on the PowerPoint. Handedness and sleep position are a list in square brackets. So I'm going to have cross-classification grouping by two columns, handedness and sleep position, boom. And there we go. So notice that I have those people who are ambidextrous, and I have one row for each of them, for each of the sleep positions, on your back, on your left side, on your right side, on your stomach. Then for the left-handed people, we have the same four options, and then for the right-handed people, the same four options. And notice that the NP mean calculates the mean for every subgroup. I mean, so just looking here, right, this is the extroversion average extroversion level for people who sleep on their stomach. I'm sorry, that's the extroversion average for all the people who sleep on their stomach and are ambidextrous. Okay, so these two things, right? This average for a number of textees average is for left-handed people who sleep on their right side. Okay, so all of these groups have a breakdown, and then because we put NP mean in there, it will actually show the average for each of these. Okay, pretty useful and cool, although when we have a ton of numeric variables, and this isn't a ton, this is only 3, but still, when we have a lot of numeric variables, the chart can get really busy. And sometimes having too much data can be a problem. So here, notice what they do. They drop the year, and they group based on handedness and sleep position. And what does this do? Well, it's about the same thing, except we've dropped out some columns that were just showing nothing. Why? Well, because they were category variables too, so there was nothing to calculate. So that's what the dot drop does. It gets rid of the year, and then it does the exact same thing as before. Okay. I don't know why this is in here. Just delete it. Okay, so now we're going to select handedness, sleep position, and hours of sleep and group by handedness and sleep position. Why? Well, because we have so many variables in the other one, now the only numeric variable we're going to have is hours of sleep. Okay. Now, so what are these counts? These counts are just the number of people in the groups, right? Okay. So now we're moving on to show another interesting method called dot pivot. The pivot method is a classic, or it draws a classic for us in statistics called a two-way table. And so we have one category variable going across horizontally, and one category, its levels get listed vertically. And then in the middle, we have the counts for each of those groups. And we can also collect statistics, but we have a little more difficult job because we need to use two additional arguments. Values equals, that's going to let us know the function that we want to collect, and then collect equals column name. We have to tell it where the numeric data is. So we've got to tell it what function to perform on the numeric data and where to find the numeric data. So it's a little more troublesome than the dot group method, but still very useful. Let's take a look here. And so now I just specify two category variables, sleep position and handedness. Notice there's no list. I just separate them by commas, and look, boom, exactly what we said would happen. It's going to put sleep position, all the different levels are represented across a horizontal, and then vertically it's displaying the handedness variable, and it's giving us all the counts in between, which is great. And then this is what we were talking about. So we've got this real simple way to display a pivot table or a two-way table. But if I want to add a statistics to it, I have to add all of this stuff down here. So values is going to be hours of sleep, and collect equals NP mean. And I just realized that I got this backwards. So the values is going to be where the numeric data is, and the collect is going to be what function to collect. So the text here was backwards, right? So we're going to collect this function, NP mean, and we're going to collect the values from the column hours of sleep. Sorry about that typo there. Let me get rid of the marks. Okay. So now, because we said values hours of sleep, because we said hours, values of sleep, hours of sleep was for the values. So these are the average. Why? Because we're collecting the mean, right? These are the average number of hours of sleep based on whether you're left-handed or right-handed, and whether you sleep on your side or your back or your stomach. Okay, and notice that they're all about the same. There isn't a big discrepancy in the values. And then notice this, that they're doing almost exactly the same thing as is shown up here with the dot pivot, only they're doing it as a group. So this is the interesting thing. I can use dot group or dot pivot when there are two, but notice that I need to use a list for dot group, right? These square brackets make it a list. And then all I have to do for dot group, I don't have to do the values equals or the collect equals. I just say comma and I say the name of the function that I want to collect. Interesting. So now the same exact information is here as there was up above. Now, I'll just say that I prefer the pivot table look. It just looks better to my eye. But it is useful to know that either dot group or dot pivot will work with two variables. Dot pivot will only work with two variables. Dot group will also work with one variable. And dot group, as the slide said, right, its big advantage is that all I have to do is put a dot comma NP average, and it'll collect that variable. It will collect that function on any numeric variable left in the table. So it's really handy that way. I do have to remember to put the square brackets around my two variables, the name of the two columns where where the category variables are. All right, so There are pros and cons to using .pivot and .group when I have two variables, but we can use either one. And so this is just the standard pivot table. And I'm going to leave the challenge questions for another video.